Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm here with Ian Williams. He's an author and a speaker and a business advisor. And he is going to share a story about his beloved dog that passed away and anything else that he wants to share today on the show. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate the introduction. Anywhere in particular you want me to start?
Start from the very beginning of your story. So tell us, what you were doing at the time, and about your dog and the situation, the circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, so it goes all the way back to probably 2009, 2010. I was in college. I was subletting a room over the summer with some friends. So it was just a college house, and we had a couple friends in the neighborhood, one that was probably a couple miles away. And that year, they had got a couple dogs, a couple cats while they were in school. And then over the summer, they all moved out. And we later came to find out that they left the dogs with one of the guy's partners, his girlfriend. And I don't know if she was meant to be taking care of him or what was going on, but she didn't live at that place, and so she ended up locking the dogs in the basement and was trying to sell them off. So we got a call, the guys that I was living with, said from one of those guys and said, "Hey, I guess my dog's in the basement. Can you go over there and just let her out, and we'll figure out what to do with her." So we went over, got the keys, still had access, went inside. Dog was probably down there 4 or 5 days based on our math. So we rescued her for the summer. And we were a bunch of college kids, really no idea what we were doing. But we had this dog, and turned into a wonderful summer. And I, at the time, was not working. Everybody else that I was living with had a job and was working. So I kind of by default turned into the primary caregiver. For Trina was her name. And that lasted about 3 months, right? The rest of the summer. And then the lease was up and we all went our separate ways, but we had this dog and we had to figure out what to do with it. And so that began probably about a 6 or 7 year relationship. I took her in and brought her home. I actually moved back to my parents at the time in order to finish school. Luckily, I come from a dog family. So she was a little American Staffordshire Terrier. She was all 45 pounds, but she was a brick house. Little pit bull. If people don't know their terriers. And she was a ton of fun, but she was also a ton of work. And so it led to a whole, series of experiences over the next couple of years. Um, Many positive, many really challenging. She was a bundle of joy at home, but then you brought her out, and um, due to I think a lot of different reasons, probably her upbringing as a puppy and stuff she was exposed to, also probably the traumatic event that she went through, being locked in the basement, probably also myself not being a even though I came from a dog family, I wasn't necessarily a dog owner at the time. Um, Not certainly not one that was responsible enough to take care of her. And so a couple years went by. I was living at home for most of that time. And then I finished school and moved in with a friend. We got an apartment in a kind of a suburb just outside of Minneapolis up here in Minnesota. And it was great for like 6, 8 months. It was a wonderful building, small, probably like 12 units, really pet friendly. So there's a lot of other pitties around. We were doing really well. And then there was just an unfortunate event where we had some friends over and my roommate let them in at the same time as another dog owner was passing through the hallway taking his dog out. So Trina got out and it turned into a all-out dog fight in the hallway, which was a pretty traumatic experience for me. It's challenging being in a space. I don't know if anybody's ever had to deal with that, right? Where your dog is attacking another dog, but obviously you're responsible for it.
Yes,
Um,
I have been in that situation before. It's scary.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not a good place to be, that's for
Yeah.
sure. It was loud, it was chaotic. I have no idea how long it lasts, but I'm sure the entire building heard it, and I'm half the building was there trying to help by the end of it all. And Um, albeit difficult, it eventually came to an end. It was tough. And anyway, at the time we got back, so I got her back into my apartment and I shut the door, and she's got blood on her face and I've got blood on my hands. And um, she looked at me and she wagged her tail and her eyes softened, and she was like, it was just like she was saying to me, like, what do we do next? Right? What's next? For her, that moment was over. It was
Mm-hmm.
done. And for me, I had, I had just had a traumatic experience, was probably still in shock for sure. And it all kind of came through in a moment, in a flash. And I just knew after the, 5 years or so that we had together, I knew in that moment, like, this isn't going to get better. There were multiple, bite incidences before that. And after that one, it was just like, I'm not prepared to do this. I'm not cut out to do this. And I don't think we had tried a number of different things, from training to psychology testing for the dog, etc. I just didn't think it was going to get any better. And so when she looked at me with those eyes, I knew in that moment, I've got to let her go. I've got to put her down. And that was probably in September. I was probably like 3/4 of the way into my year-long lease. And so, the next 24, 48 hours, I just started to kind of move the pieces around and decided it was probably best to move back in with my parents. Obviously, that incident strained my relationship with my roommate at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So I moved back home again and started to prepare. And it took me several months to prepare to make that decision. I sat on it for about a month, really thought deeply about it, and was, I think, mostly just kind of coming to terms with it. And probably in early November, I gave the vet a call and I said, hey, I got to do this. But I scheduled it for late December. I wanted to get through the holidays. It was a lot of quality time, and I knew I was going to have some time off from work. And I just wanted to really kind of savor those last couple months. So that was probably in November, set the date for December 30th of 2013, I believe it was. And just kind of savored those last couple months, took them real slow, kind of moved away from a lot of the social life. I was still young at the time, right? 21, 22, still like had a big social life, but I just kind of stayed put, stayed home, spent a lot of time with her. And the holidays came and went, and that day kept creeping closer and closer. Um, and if anybody's ever had to put a dog down, right, and especially if they've had to do it too soon, she was probably only, we guesstimated 6 or 7 at the time. Um, it's a really difficult thing to do. So we took her to the vet on December 30th, and let her go, let her transition to the other side. And it was an absolute nightmare. Thankfully, my sister was there, my parents were there, so all 4 of us were there. Um, and again, if anybody's done it, it's a really challenging thing, and you're not necessarily ready to let go, even though I had all that time to prepare for it. And so my parents and my family, the rest of my family, offered me some alone time. So they left, and it was just me and Trina in the room, and she had already passed. She was laying on the floor, and I was on the floor just sobbing with her. And I still get emotional talking about it. And I was just talking to her, basically, looking back, praying, right? I guess is how I would describe that. And I said over and over and over again, come back and visit me anytime. And eventually wrapped it up. I probably spent another 10, 15 minutes in that room by myself, went home just kind of defeated. And this is also probably maybe 8 or 9 years into substance use as well. And so I don't know, if any of your listeners have any background with substance use either, but at that point in my life, I just was not dreaming at all. Like there was so much suppression going on mentally. I wasn't dreaming anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But after this event, I went home and my dreams were just off the charts. And I was doing I'm a very introspective, kind of deeply self-reflective person. So I was doing a lot of journaling. I was doing a lot of thinking about it. And I knew at that time, she occupied such a big space in my life. And I knew at that time, if I don't actively fill this void with something or some things that are healthier,
Hmm.
I know I'm just going to go deeper down this path of substance use and abuse. So, um, one of the things that I picked up was journaling. Started doing a lot of writing, like hours a day. And I was having all these crazy dreams. And so that was one thing that I would do is I would wake up and I would just spend time writing down my dreams. Not necessarily for any particular purpose. It wasn't like I was trying to analyze them. It was just like that was just me processing. One of the ways that I was processing among many. And it was about a week, and I was tossing and I was turning all night. And I was having these crazy dreams and I was waking up and going back to sleep. And for whatever reason, I was remembering everything in the morning. But there was one particular night where I had a dream and I woke up and I was laying in bed and I was just kind of thinking about it. So I'm laying on my back, I've got my hands behind my head, I'm looking up at the ceiling. And again, if anyone has ever had a pet, right, for me at least, there's this period after they're no longer in your life where it still feels odd that they're not in the house,
Hmm.
right? So it's the middle of the night and I'm staring at the ceiling and probably a little discombobulated. And she kind of punched the door open, she nudged the door open, she walked in, she hopped up on the bed next to me. And I turned and I looked at her, and it didn't really register with me, right? Because this was only 5 or 6 days after the fact. Like she's no longer here. So I turned over and I rolled over to face her, and she curled up on the bed right next to me like she always did. And she let out this big sigh, and I fell asleep immediately. And I woke up the next morning and I opened up my journal because that's what I was doing every day. And I started writing about the experience, and I started writing about it as if it were a dream. But as I began journaling about it, I realized I was wide awake when that happened. And it was a good thing that I was home alone because I totally lost it. Um, there was just no way for me to, wrap my head around what had happened. And I was replaying it in my head over and over. And I realized as I was thinking back, she entered the room, she hopped up on the bed, and I could see her and I could hear her, but she made no imprint on the mattress. Like her physical body wasn't there.
Hmm.
Um, so when I realized I was awake, it was this transformational, mystical experience that really changed the trajectory of my life. Um, and it took me probably 45 minutes to just calm down, um, and kind of re-regulate, so to speak, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, and that was really the beginning of the rest of my life. I knew at that time, again, being almost probably a decade into substance use, I knew I wanted to get clean, couldn't stop, just couldn't stop using. And this was really the first experience that kind of proved to me, right, this kind of there's more to this world, there's more in the spirit realm, and I've got to
Hmm.
go figure it out. Um, so that's kind of where it all began, was that experience. And I can pause here because I can certainly move on, but I can also pause here if you've got questions.
Yeah, so when she came into the room and jumped on the bed, could you feel her? Because you said she kind of jumped in your arms. Or
Yeah, so I didn't reach out. There was no physical contact. I didn't even think to reach out and pet her. I just rolled over and, sometimes I'm a side sleeper. And so I just rolled over to face her and I looked at her.
Mhm,
But I heard that sigh and then I was instantly asleep again. Right. And it was just that I'd heard that sigh 1,000 times, over the years with her. And it was like, I'm ready to go to bed. Right. I'm relaxed. I'm down for the night. And she used to sleep in bed with me. That wasn't unnatural at all either. But the way that I kind of describe it to people is you just kind of have this sense that, right, the person or the thing is in the room with you. I heard her nudge the door open and I could feel every bit of her energy in the room.
mhm,
Um, But when she hopped him on the bed, I didn't make physical contact. I didn't even think to, right? Again,
Yeah.
at that time, in that moment, it wasn't odd to me. It was just like, cool, she's here and she's going to bed. Mhm.
Yeah. I've had experiences like that too with pets that have passed away. But so the dreams that you had, did you keep on dreaming about her after she passed? And did you see a pattern of maybe um, healing in those dreams as they went along, chronologically or however they manifested?
Yeah, absolutely. Not all of the dreams were necessarily about her, but I certainly, dreamt about her and I still do dream about her, not as frequently. But there were dreams kind of moving forward, right? I mean, this kind of pivotal experience or moment in my life where I guess I would say is kind of like piercing the veil, right? And the reality that you kind of thought you knew in the world that had constructed itself around you, or the one that you had accepted, was now radically different,
Yeah.
right? Because I started to
Mhm.
question everything. Um, there were absolutely dreams that, I would say looking back signified healing, right? A lot of dreams with water, a lot of dreams where I just kind of saw her, roaming free, um, dreams where she was connecting with, the other dog that we had in the family at the time. Anytime I was out in public with her, anytime she was even outside, she was always on a leash, right? Because she was a masterful escape artist. Um, and we had had a number of bite incidences already, right? So by the end of her life, she was leading a pretty small life, I would say. And so, to have those experiences where she was, in dream state, out in the field, roaming free, playing with other animals, seeing other people, those things all to me, you know, obviously we also kind of construct the narrative that we want sometimes too, right? But they all signified healing to me in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
Um, there was uh, there's been many other encounters along the way. One of the things that I picked up after letting her go was I just started running. So I signed up for the Twin Cities Marathon, which was still like 10 months out. But again, it was just that kind of accountability piece. I need to put this in place to make sure that I'm holding myself accountable to filling that space that now is now void with her gone physically. And so we would go out and I just started running in the middle of winter, right? Like this is January in Minnesota. We talked about that a little bit for the podcast, right? It's winters
Mhm.
get cold up here. And
That sounds like torture to me, but okay.
running, especially at night in the wintertime in Minnesota after a fresh snowfall is one of my all-time favorite experiences. If people have um, ever experienced Midwest Minnesota snowfall, obviously those are places that snow as well, but there's a quiet and there's a
Mhm.
stillness that comes after a snowfall.
I
And
do miss that. I miss that magical
yeah,
blanket of snow that falls and everything's really quiet and peaceful.
yeah.
But that's the only part that I miss.
If you're dressed appropriately for it, you can handle it. But it's cold, right? And it was one of many things that I kind of, dedicated her, or it was a tribute to her, right? Like I'm going to run this marathon, and she and I used to run together. And so in many ways, it was like that year of running I dedicated to her. And so it was also it was a time and a place in my life. It was an activity where I could not only kind of experience that stillness externally in my environment, but also get to that stillness internally as well, which was a difficult thing to do at the time. And so we would run on the trails together, and every once in a while I'd feel her pop in, running on right on my left like she always did. Um, and then it was, if we fast forward even a couple of years, I remember going to a New Year's Eve yoga class. I met my at the time partner, now wife, shortly after. I let go of Trina, and we went to a New Year's Eve yoga class together, and I was laying in Shavasana at the end, and all of a sudden I felt Trina's paws on my chest, and she was licking my face, and she rode home in the car with me. So there's definitely been, a number of connections since, right? But um, it takes a quiet internal state of existence, I think, at least it does for me, to kind of experience those um, moments, right, where you can kind of
Mhm.
sense a more subtle energy around.
Yeah, I had my very first dog. I didn't grow up with dogs because we lived in a city apartment building that didn't allow pets. So my grandmother had a dog when we visited her in New Hampshire, but me and my partner at the time had adopted a white boxer, which a lot of people thought was a pit bull. But he wasn't. He just had his ears cropped and he was all white. And he was probably 9 when we adopted him. So he was close to the end, because they don't live that long. And I didn't want that dog because I wanted the cute little fluffy freckles that was also up for adoption. But my partner convinced me this was a great dog. I really want this dog. And we took him and we jumped in the van and we were supposed to drove cross country, but we ended up stopping in Texas and coming back from, van problems, mechanical problems. But my eventually we split up and he took the dog, and I know that the dog didn't, he eventually died, but I had a very vivid dream about him too, very similar to yours, because I was asleep and he was in the dream. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I know he was in my dream. And when I woke up, I literally sat up in the bed and looked around the bed for him because I felt the energy so strongly, like he was in the room with me. And it's something that I didn't think about. It's just something I automatically just sat up and said, "Where is he?" And then I realized, oh, he's not here physically, but I felt his energy. So up until Trina passed, did you believe in an afterlife?
You know, to be totally honest, it's not something that I feel like I spent a great deal of time thinking about. Um, looking back now, it's been almost a decade since letting her go, and 7 years of sobriety and recovery. And so looking back on it, of course, hindsight's 2020, or at least a little closer to. I knew during those years of substance use, I continued to see myself for whatever reason, and I did none of this mindfulness-based practice at the time, but I continued to see myself doing yoga, practicing meditation, other mindfulness-based arts, but that wasn't really a part of my, um, it certainly wasn't a part of my day-to-day. It wasn't anything that I had done any research on. However, I've always been kind of a big thinker and a big dreamer, and so I always was curious, right, about this kind of great beyond. But aside from just that curiosity, I hadn't necessarily formulated any opinions or beliefs about it, right? Because I
Mhm.
didn't necessarily feel like I had any direct experience with it. And the night before this experience happened, where Trina came to visit me, um, I was reading a book called Of Water and the Spirit by an author named Malidoma Patrice Somé, I believe.
Yeah, I
And
read that book. That book is amazing.
it's a
There's some
phenomenal book.
crazy stuff in that book.
It's a
I
phenomenal
remember
book.
reading that book going like, "Wait, what?" And I
Mhm.
had to backtrack a couple pages, go, "What's happening in here?"
Yeah. And I was at the point in the book where, he had, so for anyone who hasn't read it, I guess you could say it's a memoir. He had, or not a biography. He was back in his village and he was going through his, traditional rite of passage, but he was doing it as an adult, which again, according to my recollection, so please excuse me if the details are a little bit wrong, is not something that was traditionally done over a certain age. And so I was in the passage of the book where I was reading about some of his experiences during that rite of passage. And, maybe that was a little bit of like priming the pump, so to speak, right? About like
Mhm,
people do experience this, great beyond. There are people that can, in a number of different ways, right, kind of communicate with a more subtle energy, or, other dimensions, or however you want to describe it. It doesn't really matter to me. Um, and so, when I had that experience, and the real kicker was the realization or recognition of I was awake when that happened. It wasn't a dream.
mhm,
It was a total shift in consciousness, right? Because it was a um, it just kind of shattered the reality that I had come to believe or know. And so I woke up that day, and I went to my partner's house at the time, not my current wife, and she happened to be reading a book called "Many Many Lives, Many Masters."
Another one I've
Um,
read.
yeah,
Yep.
and so she started talking to me about the book that she was reading, because of course for her there was a lot of parallels, but for me it was such a monumental experience that like it couldn't be articulated with words, and it was still so fresh and so raw. um but it was one thing that I said, I know that I need to go explore. I need to go figure out what this, curiosity is about. I need to go see if I can figure this out. At the time, it was with the intention of getting some answers. Now, after, nearly a decade of mindfulness-based practice, it's not about getting answers anymore. It's just about experiencing the depth of the practice. But,
Hmm.
so I started going to yoga weekly, and that's actually where I met my wife, now wife. And I was doing yoga classes, and just starting to dabble in some meditation for probably like 8 or 9 months. And I was starting to have these, physical sensations and these energetic sensations in class that I was talking to my instructor about. And, it was like there weren't any answers, right? It was, well, that's cool. I experienced that too. And I had another friend at the time. He said, I've been studying Qigong. Maybe you should go do some Qigong. And so I signed up for Qigong class that fall. And so I just kind of went all in, and, it ended up being yoga and Qigong and Tai Chi and meditation and martial arts. I just kind of went all in. Um, and looking back on it, it was like, okay, that was a valid experience. I don't need anybody else to tell me whether it was real or not. I know it was
Hmm.
real. Um, and I also don't need anybody else to explain it to me, right? Like part of what's special about it is the mystery. And for me, I would say that continues to be the case with my mindfulness based practice, right? Is
Yeah.
sitting down every day, or getting to the mat every day, or bringing your practice with you off the mat into the world. Like it's part of the mystery that makes it special. So yeah,
Or what really matters is your interpretation of the experience and what does it mean to you, personally. Because over time, right, I talk about symbolism. Like there's certain symbols that you could look it up in a symbology and what that means, but over time, you're going to create your own meaning with those symbols,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, through your search, your inner search, right? Your
Yeah.
inner meaning. So this was all triggered by Trina's passing.
I mean, it was a watershed moment. It completely changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah.
And that next year, I committed to my writing. I went really deep into mindfulness based practice. I started training for the marathon, started making changes to my diet. I really started to build the tools that I would then use to kind of lever my way out of substance abuse. Um, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life, right? It's not like, and I should say the way that it did that is because it started this exploration of that inner terrain, right? Like
Hmm.
that inner
Hmm.
landscape is what I now call it.
Yeah.
And that exploration and that curiosity turned into um it turned into self-awareness. And that self-awareness is ultimately what became the fulcrum, or the tool that allowed me to kind of lever my way up and out of some of the habits and relationships and jobs and all the places that I knew like I don't want to be here anymore, but I just felt like I was going through the motions in my life. It changed all that because for whatever reason, and looking back, I feel like this was really probably a bit of support by some higher powers. I sometimes forced myself into saying this is an opportunity in some way, shape, or form, right? Like I could play the victim card here and I could allow this to completely debilitate me, but I need to look at this as an opportunity. And I need to find a way to look at this as a gift and
Mm-hmm.
something that I can use to kind of springboard into, a newer, updated version of myself, so to speak. And so it's not like there wasn't crippling depression. There was, but I would sit down with my journal, or I would sit down in therapy, or whoever I was really just kind of pouring my heart out to at the moment, and would continue to reiterate that within myself, right? There's an opportunity here. I just need to find the silver lining. And it really began a mindset shift. And I think that mindset shift is ultimately one of the greatest gifts she's given me, right? Because it turned into an opportunity to look at the world in a different way, not one where life was happening to me, but rather one where life was happening for me. And I have an opportunity to be a more active and engaged participant in this world, and that's really ultimately what I think kind of changed things was the mindset shift. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier about after her passing, and I didn't write your exact words, but that you feel the presence, their presence after they, transition to the other side. And that is so true because I experienced that when I was way younger, when my father passed away. And I was in the apartment, and his energy was just everywhere. I mean, it was overwhelming. It wasn't like, oh, he's just a little bit here. It's like, boom, I'm here. And I'm looking at all the things that he left behind before, because he went to work and collapsed at work. So there were like pots on the stove. And I said, oh, he might have used that pot, to make eggs that morning or whatever it was. And I was just walking through the apartment and looking at his clothes and touching his clothes and, but really feeling him there, that his powerful presence was there with me. And I was just crying and crying, and my sister was crying. And it was just so overwhelming that yes, even though he's not here physically, I can feel him here with me. I can feel his energy or his spark. His life force is with me. And so that changed everything. Just like you, it changed. I said up until that point I had been kind of raised Catholic, and I didn't like that God that of the Bible. I didn't like him. I thought he was mean and cruel and scary. And I had rejected that years before. And I said, well, if that's God, then forget it. I don't believe in God then because I don't know what God is.
Right.
And then after my dad passed, I thought, wow, if he's still here with me and I can feel his energy and life force was with me, then there's gotta be a God or a creator or a source. Like I more talk about creator. I like that word, because there's no religious connection to that really. So I after that I started believing in a source, a creator. And I thought, well, let me explore what that really is, not what I'm being told it is, but what is that really? And that life really goes on, continues.
Yeah.
And then, looking at my dad, he had died really young, and that really changed how I felt about taking care of my body and being healthy and being as healthy as possible so that I could live a long time as a healthy person, right? As best as quality life that I could have. So it's so true. And even with pets, I'm a prolific dreamer. So, and I'm a medium. So if anybody dies, I end up dreaming about them or something, or having a visitation, can't even tell like you did. Can't tell if it's a dream or am I half asleep or, what am I seeing? But yeah, and the wonderful thing is, I don't know if you've ever had a dream of Trina kind of telling you it's okay, you let me go. But I had a dream like that from a dog that I had a really difficult relationship with. And the dream was there were little kids kind of climbing on him and he was old already. And I said, "Don't do that. Don't climb on him. He's old and you could hurt him." And I remember the look on his face. He looked up at me and I just had this feeling like he was thanking me for taking care of him all the way to the end. Like no matter how many times we clashed, like personality wise and who's alpha and I'm the alpha or whatever issue we had, that was his way of telling me he was grateful that I had taken care of him no matter what. I mean, what a beautiful gift to have.
Yeah, and for the people out there who um might be curious about the other side, or might be curious and want to learn more, develop the skills. There's a there's a couple things I would say. One is back to your point about symbolism. There's a very fine line between experiencing subtle energies and kind of like concocting them yourself, right? Creating the narrative, creating the experience for yourself.
Mhm,
um, I would certainly say I've done both over the years, right? But when this happened, I had no prior, experiences. It's not like I was, I've since met people, right, who are born a medium. They've been having these experiences or these abilities since they were children. That was not me at all. And it was through a very diligent practice, multiple mindfulness-based practices, as well as a diligent practice of that exploration of the inner terrain that allowed me to develop a bit more sensitivity and awareness. But all of that being said, it can sound so, kind of mystical and ethereal and esoteric even, right?
mhm,
But what I say to people still to this day is like, we're all doing it all the time. It's just whether we're aware of it or not, right? When
mhm,
you, like, in the moment after the dog fight, when I brought Trina back into the apartment, it was it was the way she looked at me, right? And it was the message that came through. You could say it was how you interpreted it, right? But when you spend day in and day out, years on end with an animal or a person, you start to read their energy,
mhm,
right? And you're doing it intuitively. You're
mhm,
communicating at a more subtle level. And that's how I knew in that moment, right? Because for her, the moment was done. Like, boom, that was fun, or it wasn't fun, but it was an experience for her, and that experience was done. And she was like, let's go for a walk, let's play with the toy, let's do some training, let's whatever it was. Like, she was just done. And I knew in that moment, it wasn't necessarily that I need to. Part of what came out of it was I need to let her go, but it was also like I don't think she's going to find the healing and the peace, right? I think she's always going to be this dog. And when that realization came through for me, then it transpired into, this, am I able and willing to live with this dog for the next 8, 10 years of her life, however long it lasts. And in that moment, I knew I'm not prepared to do this. I can't even, straighten out my own life, let alone, you know, on behalf of this animal.
mhm,
And So there's a lot wrapped up in here, but to kind of go back to this kind of the subtle energies, right? The We've all kind of heard the stories, right? The person passes and then you see the lights flicker, or you could have sworn you caught them out of the corner of your eye, or there's a fine line between like kind of manifesting those experiences on your own because you want them to happen, you're willing them into existence, versus they're happening and you're just aware that they're happening. And part of what my mindfulness based practice has taught me is, it's not like I approach my mindfulness based practice because I want to develop these abilities. That's not at all why I got into it necessarily. I wanted answers, but maybe it was why I got into it, but it's certainly not what I'm trying to get out of it now. But that awareness is really important. And in order to have that awareness, one has to have a really um, firm understanding of an ability to differentiate between what is them and what is not. What's happening internally versus what's happening externally. Or one of those moments where, you're thinking about the person and then it shows up in front of you, versus it shows up in front of you and then you start thinking about it. It's a slight
Yeah.
differentiation, and that being curious in that space is really what I would say for anyone who's like really, if they're wanting to learn more about this stuff, right? It's more about curiosity than it is about like
Yeah.
learning to control it.
Hmm.
Um, at least that's been my experience.
Definitely, because when you come from from curiosity, it's more about allowing and accepting it happen instead of trying to influence or control. But I think it's a combination of both. I think that we're creating it, but it's also happening. For example, we're all individuals, but we're also in a collective. So we're creating and our reality individually, but we're still swimming in the soup of collective reality.
Mhm.
And other people's thoughts and emotions can affect us. So it's both at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
But I think also like the key is to pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening because um I mean I wasn't talking to ghosts at 3 or 5 years old. That's but I was getting information I think all the time that I didn't understand what it was, you know? And
Mhm.
when I started understanding, wait a minute, this might be information from spirit, or it might have something to do with someone I'm with, and I see somebody in my mind's eye, and I don't know who it is, it might be connected to that person and not me. And then the question is, do I want to bring it up? Is it appropriate to say anything? Does it matter? There's all these questions that come up. But once I started, I was like, oh, because up until a certain point, I was dismissing all of it because I didn't understand what it was. And then when you dismiss it, you forget about it. It's like out of your mind. And that's why the journaling is important because even with the dreams, you'll forget the details. So I was like, that something would come up, I would get a feeling or probably a vision, and I'd be like, well, I don't know what that is, and move along with my day.
Mhm.
But now I know it means something. I may not know what it means, but I pay attention to it.
Yeah. And that, to kind of even to back away from this kind of more subtle space, it was just that starting to pay attention, which is what changed the trajectory of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the self-reflection of um, I need to figure out, why am I using, right? What's the cause of the depression and anxiety that's underlying? Because I'm masking it with substance use. And it was paying attention and really diving headfirst into the deepest waters of self-discovery that led to all of the growth and maturation in my life, right? If anyone would have said to me 9 years ago, this is what your life's going to look like a decade after putting her down, I probably wouldn't have believed them,
Mm-hmm.
because it would have been so radically different from what my life looked like at that time. But it was so it wasn't, like a decade later premeditated. It's not like I woke up and I said, this is what I want my life to go look like. I'm going to go make it. It was much more a process of I'm going to go inward in an attempt to figure this out. And then it all just started to unfold before me. Right. And
Hmm.
you might be able to see a couple stepping stones ahead, but you can't see past that. And you just have to trust that those stones are going to show up for, they'll be underfoot when it's time to take that step. And it led to, I mean, it led to sobriety. It led to a new social life. It led to um, the mindfulness-based practices and all that has brought. It led to better physical, mental, emotional, psychological well-being. It led to, an entirely new career. It's a domino effect that I could not have predicted, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But that came from the day-to-day practice of just paying attention, right? And it wasn't even
Yes.
really
Hmm.
trying to cultivate self-awareness. It was just self-awareness became a byproduct of paying attention. And
Yeah.
there's nothing, it can be easy to talk about this stuff, and it can certainly for me still be easy to listen to it and then like put people up on a pedestal, right? Well, they've figured it out. I don't claim to have anything figured out.
Yeah.
I just wake up every day and do my best to recommit to paying attention, and quite honestly, I don't want to have it figured out. Like, I enjoy the mystery, and
Yeah.
there are certain things that I make meaning out of, and there are certain things that are meaningful to me, or versus me kind of learning, it's them teaching, which you could say is one and the same, but like there's this in to out process that's constantly back and forth. But you've got to get um, familiar with your internal landscape, because there's more variability, in the head, the heart, the mind, the emotions, the physical body. And if those things aren't, I don't want to say, completely consistent and stable, but if you don't have a gauge on your day-to-day experiences and your internal experience, it can be pretty hard to kind of differentiate between the two. Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I call um, interacting and communicating with the universe. Because I feel like the universe is always interacting with us, and there are messages and hints and nudges and feelings and thoughts and pictures, and that's all part of the communication with the universe. And that's how you can live your life. This is how it sounds like you're living your life. This is the way I'm living my life. So you can have goals and dreams, of course, but be flexible, because there might be something even better than what you imagine coming your way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if it's something that you're dreaming up for yourself intellectually, it's almost assuredly not the best path for you. If you're living your, and this is coming through personal experience, right? I mean,
Yep.
I have lived so much of my life through intellect, and time and again, the universe reminds me, there's something better in store for you. You need to let
Yeah.
go of that need to control.
Yeah.
You know, you need to kind of release and relax into this space and allow it unfold. Um, and
Just
there are
be
certain times
flexible
where,
and be open to magic, because I think that communication with the universe, that's the magical part. That's when the magic happens.
yeah,
And the more you pay attention to it, the more magic happens.
yeah. And it can be easy to like, you probably experienced this as well. Like, it can be easy to get lost in that space too, right? And there's something to be said about, kind of grounding in this world, this
Hmm.
dimension, right? Because this is a reality for us, not necessarily the reality, but it's a reality for us. And I've seen people kind of get lost in space, and we've got real work to do here in this planet, in this
Yeah.
society, in this culture, in this species. And it's not to say that, it's not about better or worse. It kind of goes back to what you're saying, like we're individuals swimming in collective soup. That's a beautiful way to say it, right? Because there's that duality and more, and
Yeah.
so it's not like there's not one thing that's going to be the answer. But sometimes the way that I describe it is like the one answer is what's ever appropriate for the moment. And that's
Yeah.
always going to be different. What's appropriate in the moment is always going to be different, but paying attention, and then being really like calculated and intentional about building the skills to be in the present moment. Because I know that phrase is so watered down at this point, or like be in the present moment. But if you haven't learned how to do that, and you haven't experienced what it's like to be here and then not here,
Hmm.
intellectually or emotionally or whatever. But the reality is you are always here, and so it's hard to be somewhere else. You can go somewhere else in your mind, you can go somewhere else, right when you're sleeping or whatever, but like you're always in the moment. It's just a matter of how much are we paying attention, how present are we, how grounded are we in the moment, and then how aware of our surroundings are we as we're in that moment.
Yeah, I just said to my teenage daughter recently, I said, you got to get grounded in your body. Come back to your body because we're in a body here for a reason. And that's where our power lies, is in this body and knowing that we're a soul in a body and that we get to dictate what we want to happen on this planet. Spirit doesn't have that. They can advise us, they can try to, you know, manipulate us, they could whatever, but it's us. We have to decide. Decide what you want and then say what you want. That's how I do things when I do sacred ceremony on a sacred day or whenever I'm called to it. Everything I say, this is what I want to happen. Make it happen.
Yeah. And there are like there's one as you were talking, there was one moment from the past that kind of jumped back into my head of this is just a couple of years ago, maybe it was 2018. Um, I had stopped paying attention, and I was in a Muay Thai martial arts class, and I was holding a pad for a guy, and he missed the pad with his roundhouse kick and broke my forearm. And looking back on it, like I still jokingly say the universe broke my arm, but it was this like pay attention, right? It was that little
Mm-hmm.
jolt that rattled the cage. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm not paying attention anymore, right? And
Yep.
so unfortunate that I had to, experience that, but also kind of testament to like that's how far I was from myself,
Yeah.
that's how far outside of myself, so to speak, I was. I was not connected anymore, right? And so you get those moments where you kind of, but then we have to take the initiative on our own volition and like ground into that space, recommit.
Yeah.
And that's a daily practice, and
Yeah.
so the as I speak and teach now, and particularly with the clients that I work with in the business space, and I often hear this message, like your spiritual work and business, they don't mesh, which, to each their own. But as I'm working, with leaders, it's like everybody's got this drive. We want something more, we might know how to get it, we might not know how to get it, but we're struggling. We're just struggling. And it's one of the things that I talk about often with my clients, right? Is okay, let's just focus on your day-to-day human stuff. Let's get your business operations in order, right? Let's get you some time back. And let's get you in a place where you're not spending all of your waking hours just trying to keep all the plates spinning. Then we can move from there into a space, for me, it's always into a space of well-being. I'm doing that kind of business process oriented work in order to get to a space where we can talk about whatever you want to call it, work-life balance, well-being, employee engagement. I don't really care what words you want to wrap around it, but like it goes back to that kind of symbiosis, that two-way street, right? There's an exchange there, and we need to be present and outward, but we also need to be receptive with what's coming inward.
Mm-hmm. They need to be both. And I don't understand how you could separate the physical from the spiritual. It's all connected. It's all interdimensional. That's what we are. No matter how much somebody out there wants to separate it out and label it and put it in different categories, it's not going to work that way. Universe is going to come in and swipe the cards off the table. Or for example, what reminded me this morning, I stubbed my toe on the chair, and it's because I was rushing through things this morning. So I have the awareness that, yeah, I stubbed my toe because I'm moving too fast and I'm trying to do too many things and I need to slow down. Or, you hurt yourself, right? You stub your toe or break a bone, even worse. So whenever like I have clients that have accidents, like they sprained their ankle or they have a car accident, I always ask a lot of questions like, what were you thinking about when it happened? What was happening in your life at that time? What were you planning to do? What kind of job did you have? Were you happy about? It's like all of that. And the accident tells you usually don't do that. Don't be doing what you're doing. Don't be heading in that direction, literally.
Mhm. And it goes back to what you said, right, about the symbolism. Like it's the process of meaning making. What is
Mm-hmm.
your process for making meaning? And my life has benefited greatly from having a more consistent process, right? And my modalities are journaling and mindfulness-based practices, exercise, getting into my body. Like there are things like that which um, they're very deliberate practices for me, and other people have their own versions of that, right? Some people are in their flow state when they're, whatever, riding their bicycle or when they're doing their work or when they're cooking in the kitchen, whatever it is. But like find those things that get you into that close space with yourself, because that's the state of existence that I think is where we stand to develop that self-awareness, and that the clarity to see the world the way it is.
And even if you're stuck in your mind or, you can't clear your monkey mind or whatever the issues are, that's why the word practice is used, because the more practice and time and energy you put into it, the better you're going to get at it.
And also, yeah, right, there's that, and then there's the depth of practice as well, right? Like how present are you when you're sitting in meditation? Are you really with yourself, or are you thinking about your grocery list?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember who, is it John Kabat-Zinn who says like who are you with in the shower, right? Are you with yourself, or are you thinking about somebody
I'm
else?
never
you
alone.
know
Not just kidding.
Yeah. But it's one of the phrases I love about, in the yoga community, right? Like bring your practice off the mat.
Yeah,
Not a
yeah.
place, it's not something we do when we just, go and sit, right?
Or
Yoga.
like there's moments where you can practice all throughout the day. Or for example, like I like to get massages, like monthly massages. And when I'm laying there, all I'm thinking about is how I'm feeling as a result of the massage. And then when my mind starts to wander, I bring myself back. And I said, let's not think about that right now. Let's think about how I'm feeling in my body due to the massage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all those different ways to bring yourself back to the present moment. Because on a massage table, that's where you could really just run off the ethers if you just let yourself.
Yeah.
I have a friend that she gets massages too, and she's like, I wasn't even in my body. And I said, mm-mm, I don't do that when I'm getting a massage. I make sure I'm in my body because I want to be as connected to how I'm feeling as a result of the massage.
Yeah. Just being engaged in the process.
Right, being present with that moment
Yeah.
of receiving that massage and how it's making me feel.
Yeah. Yeah. There's um like a little test sometimes that it's not really a test, it's an experiment sometimes that I ask people to do, if they're curious about this stuff, which is like when you're grocery shopping, pick up, you know, whatever it is, pick up one product in the right hand, pick up another product in the left hand, and like just think about, okay, if I put this into my body, how does it feel? and then kind of detach from that feeling. Observe the sensations, the physical sensations, right? And then if I put this other product in my body, how does that feel? It's just that, and then observe the physical sensations. You know, I didn't know as a child that I probably had dietary sensitivities my entire life, right? And it wasn't until I started doing the mindfulness-based practices where it was like, wow, I'm eating this and I'm not feeling good after.
Mm-hmm.
I never really put those two things together. It wasn't part of my awareness yet, right? But it's little simple things like that that we can do from a moment to moment basis to stay engaged with our lives. And that relationship between the internal landscape and then the external landscape, it's that's where all the juice is.
That's where the magic is.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
Ian, I could talk to you all day about this, but we're approaching the hour point. So please share how people can contact you and a little bit. I know you're an author, so about a little bit about your books and your practice, your services.
Yeah, appreciate it. February 21st of 2023, I will be publishing my first book. It's called Soil and Spirit. It's got a lot of similar themes to what we talked about today, right? How internal transformation is what's going to lead to kind of cultural transformation. So if they want to learn more about that, listeners can go to www.reviveyouandi.com. It's revive, the letter U, ANDI.com. If they want to reach out to me personally, it's just Ian@reviveyouandi.com. And then if anyone's interested to learn a little bit more about business consulting work, that's www.stillpointinsight.com. So those are kind of my main websites: Revive You and I, Still Point Insight. And then if they want to find me on social media, I'm either Ian C. Williams or Revive You and I. So for Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, it's Revive You and I. If they want to find me on LinkedIn or YouTube, it's Ian C. Williams. Happy to connect, happy to reach out. Same, could talk about this all day. These are the conversations that I love having. These are the type of conversations that I live for. So
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
reach out if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your beautiful story about Trina. I'm sure a lot of people could relate because we've all lost animals that we loved or loved ones. And, you know, there's life after death. That energy is still there. It's just transformed to something different.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to share the story, Tina. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.